Good afternoon on the East Coast. Good morning in other parts of the country. You're here for Ratcheting Up Rural Response, Recovery and Resilience, 5 good ideas for philanthropy right now. Today's event partners who put this together include the Rural Development Innovation Group, the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, United Philanthropy Forum, Rural LISC, HAC, which is the Housing Assistance Council, and the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. I'm Janet Topolsky. I'm the Executive Director of Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, and I'll be moderating you through or walking you through what's going to happen today before we start. The objectives for what we're trying to do today are 4. We really want to, as we have in the past through Aspen CSG and many of our partners do on a regular basis as well, to raise the importance and understanding of key factors that are important in rural America in general, but at this moment to rural recovery and resilience. We want to profile 5 ideas that we think would improve rural recovery as well as regional resilience, and offer, as we do that, both on-the-ground experience from practitioners and perspectives from funders who have either funded the idea or are thinking about it or have been acting on the idea themselves. And then we want to give you, in the second hour, if you're going to join into the Zoom breakouts, the opportunity to ask questions, to offer your own ideas and your experience and advice. So this first hour, we're functioning as a webinar. We're pushing this information to you and profiling each idea. If you want to explore the idea, join the second hour. There's a Zoom breakout link for each one of the ideas. It's been sent to you. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that'll be open discussion. How were these 5 ideas selected? The exchange partners that put this virtual exchange together, starting with the Rural Development Innovation Group, really talk to on-the-ground practitioners and say, what could philanthropy be really helpful with right now? There were a lot of ideas, as you might guess, but we narrowed to start with this particular session with 5 ideas using these criteria. They need sources of investment and funding, these ideas. They have great potential for leveraging more resources into a region. They've got both short-term benefit in terms of response to COVID-19 right now, as well as long-term recovery and resilience benefits. They might not be on some radar screens of funders as much as some other ideas. And we also wanted to have a mix of relatively simple things to do or to fund or to support or to act on, as well as some that are more complex. We want to acknowledge there are many other ideas that are important to rural. Broadband access, immediate health and wellness needs, fund those too. But we wanted to focus on these. I want to talk a little bit about the context in which we're doing this particular virtual exchange. It was really the ravages and the inequitable impact of COVID-19 was really what got us started on this. But that context includes, the inequitable impact includes geographic inequity between rural and urban and how quickly resources have gotten to rural, but also the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had on people of color. People of color, which includes Native Americans, it includes African Americans, it includes Latinx people, it includes immigrants from many nations. People of color are responsible, they're the fastest growing population in rural America, and they're responsible for a lot of the critical resources and services that all Americans need. So we want to be very clear that rural recovery and resilience and how and where it's focused is an essential component of addressing and redressing structural racism in this country at this time. Here are the 5 ideas we're going to profile today. Help rural navigate and access the best available assistance resources, increase the capacity of rural serving CDFIs, MDIs, and revolving loan funds, invest the catalytic capital of place-based philanthropy in the community, strengthen regional industry value chains, and build a region's preparedness, resilience, and emergency partnerships. For each idea, we're going to give you a profile, and we're going to it's going to be a really parallel structure. So each idea will be led by 2 or 3 people, practitioners and funders. A rural practitioner is going to set the context for the idea, give you an overview, say why is it a good idea right now, some lived or known experience, talk about benefits. And then a rural funder and a recipient of funding for this idea is really going to talk about what happened. They're going to share a story. That's going to happen in the first hour, and we're going to run giving 10 minutes to each one of those ideas. At the end of the first hour, if you want to explore one of those ideas more, you choose the breakout room you want to go to. You were sent several times, including in the last hour or two, a Zoom room link for each breakout room, for each idea. So those breakout rooms will be led by the speakers who are going to do the profiling in the first hour. There's no agenda other than your questions and your value adding experience and ideas. That's how this will run. With that, just a little housekeeping. You're going to be muted for this first hour. If you have any tech issues, please use the chat box. We have people standing by who will address the tech issues. As I said, you'll enter the breakout room of your choice by using the room Zoom breakout. You should have received an email with those idea breakout rooms already. If you haven't, put it in the chat box and someone on our staff will send it to you. And those links have been sent again just in the last hour. So recordings of this session, the main session, as well as the breakout rooms will be available on the Aspen CSG YouTube site within 24 hours. We'll be sending those links out to you as well. The PowerPoint is already available on aspencsg.org. With that, we're going to immediately get started, and I'm going to turn it over on first idea, help rural navigate and access the best available assistance resources, to John Molinaro from the Appalachian Partnership in Ohio, and Anthony Chang, the new CEO of the Dogwood Health Trust, which is a brand new health legacy foundation in Western North Carolina.
Thank you, Janet. This first idea, again, is to help rural navigate and access the best available assistance resources. And the focus of this idea is really twofold. The first is to help the communities and organizations in rural America learn about public and private resources that could be used for response and recovery. And the second is, once those resources are identified, to help rural communities and organizations succeed in doing what they must do to access and use the resources well. Next slide. Thank you. So if you're, those of you who are familiar with rural America know that many rural communities and organizations have no staff, that have a responsibility or time to sift through the mountain of government, philanthropic, and private sector program opportunities at a time like this. They may not have anyone who understands the qualifications of programs, the restrictions, how to use the programs, either for immediate situations or for their medium or long-term recovery. May not have anyone who knows how to apply for those resources or how to form a collaborative to apply. And the capacity during a time of disaster like this is even lower than it is in regular times, because there are greater demands on staff in both work and personal lives as they deal with the impact of the disaster in their home and in their community. Some programs that do fund in disaster situations like to have some skin in the game locally, a local dollar match. And while that might work in a place with a lot of discretionary resources, matching dollars are very hard to come by in rural communities, particularly low income and minority rural communities. And that's next to impossible at a time like the present. So yeah, as we work on this, I'm going to tell just a little story of how I first became involved in the philanthropic response to disaster. And that was in 1989, while at West Central Initiative, a regional community foundation and rural development hub in western Minnesota. The foundation was just 3 years old in 1989, so it was young. It didn't have a lot of resources. When we experienced a 500-year flood of the Red River Valley of the North, and it was the first of 3 major floods of the Red River within a 5-year period. It very quickly became clear to us that most of our communities didn't have the capacity to navigate recovery grant programs, and that there were really very few resources available to help businesses and nonprofits find and apply for those assistance programs. The communities had even fewer financial resources during the time of disaster because of lost tax revenues. And at the same time, the community's workload increased as they dealt with the immediate impact of the disaster on their community's operations. In addition, the staff people that were working for the communities and the nonprofits dealing with the impact of the disaster in their organizations were also dealing with that impact in their personal lives. And it was stretching them thin personally and professionally. So our primary response was to hire a local flood recovery coordinator who could assist our communities in navigating the various public and private philanthropic resources that are available, recovery grant programs and the like. We also provided some funding to our Small Business Development Center to staff up to better help affected businesses and critical nonprofits access disaster programs. And in addition, we supported experienced grant writers to help communities with specific recovery grant applications that were right for their circumstances and selected by their communities. In addition, we supported experienced grant, the impact of these relatively small investments was really immense. Our communities were the first to get their recovery grant applications in, the first to be funded, the first to show progress recovering, and all this in comparison to other flooded areas in the Red River Valley. So we knew we had impact because our communities were doing better faster than others. Our businesses and nonprofits were quicker to recover, and that was especially true for the smallest businesses where local sole entrepreneurs were dealing with both flooded homes and flooded businesses and struggling to handle both impacts. We kept our recovery coordinator on board long enough to assist our communities with setting up the administrative systems for grant reporting and reimbursement, a critical and often overlooked step, and which helped them avoid the many issues that plague communities in other regions. A flood may sound like a different sort of disaster from a pandemic, but the impacts on people's lives, disrupted businesses, community capacity, and tax revenues were very similar to what we're seeing today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Anthony Chang, CEO of Dogwood Health Trust, to share Dogwood's experience with similar strategies. Anthony?
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, just an incredible story. And so one of the great things that I'd like to bring to the table here is that Dogwood is very new. We were just established last year. A lot of what you just heard from John and the amazing impact that they had in that region. We launched our very parallel, like literally almost word for word parallel initiative. John, I wish I'd met you a long time ago. Just a few months ago, maybe about 6 months ago. So I can attest that this can be done. It can be done quickly. It doesn't require, and you can tackle this whether you're a small funder or a big funder. Just to share with you some quick numbers. We did put a full-time FTE on it, so we did choose to make that investment, but you could staff this with either a collaborative group of folks in a rural community or at your funding location. And while we invested about $350,000 in the last 6 months or so, most of that was on paying for professional grant writers, and the average cost per application was about $8,000. And so that $350,000 just in 6 months has generated $5 million in state and federal funding. So you can see the ROI in just even our launching phase is quite high. It's like 11, 12 to 1. And over time, in my past experience, and I think John's as well, you start to see ROIs of 20, sometimes 50 for every dollar that you put in. And John is making a really great point that a lot of organizations simply don't have exercised the muscle of, looking at these government applications and just the capacity building that you're doing of, exercising this muscle for your rural constituents makes a huge difference. The other thing that I would say is that a lot of these applications are stronger if they're collaboratively submitted. And so rural communities, that's one of their great strengths, is working together. And so sometimes just being a catalyst for that is incredible. And as John mentioned, just to again share some of our lived experience, sometimes it's just they don't know about these opportunities. And so just in the last 6 months, a single FTE, again, it kind of snowballs, right? Because you make a connection with this community partner and then this sector, school districts versus public health versus law enforcement, et cetera, and pretty soon, so far we've centralized 350 relevant RFPs that are relevant to Western North Carolina, to multiple different types of sectors. And I just very quickly also want to mention that sometimes as a funder, we might be focused on just the small business sector or just the nonprofit sector. I think this recent experience with the SBA, what was called the Triple P program, the Paycheck Protection Program, is a really great example. We leveraged and utilized our network of both nonprofit and for-profit community partners in rural areas, and we're able to catalyze with minimal investment of staff time, basically working together in a very small period of time, about $9 million in drawn down Triple P money. About half of that went to nonprofits and about half of that went to small businesses, most with less than 5 employees. And so the average sort of SBA loan, Triple P loan, was $15,000, $20,000 or less. And about 70% of that money in this region actually was rural. Only 30% was in the metro area. And over 50% was to women and diverse-led small businesses and rural organizations. And so one of the points that I want to emphasize is that sometimes just by activating your networks and making sure that, for example, in this situation, nonprofits knew that they were eligible for Triple P as much as small businesses were, can really catalyze access to some of these programs. And so whether you're a small funder or a big funder, you're super established, but you've never done this kind of work to build capacity and catalyze your community stakeholders, this can be done brand new. It can be done very quickly and can be done with any kind of size, like I said, utilizing the natural strengths of rural communities.
Thank you, Anthony and John. Now we're going to move on to idea 2, which is to increase the capacity of rural serving community development financial institutions, minority development depository institutions, and revolving loan funds. We have Dennis West from Northern Initiatives in Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and Crystal Cornelius from First Nations Awista Corporation in Colorado. Dennis?
Thank you, Janet. It's good to be with everyone. Northern Initiatives represents mostly rural Michigan, and we're a community development financial institution that focuses on money and know-how. A lot of our loans are to startups. Last year was 47% of our loans were to startups, and we pride ourselves on not just putting together capital, but also putting together the technical assistance support to help start and grow businesses. Crystal?
Hi, good morning, afternoon, wherever you all are. Thank you so much for taking the time today. My name is Crystal Cornelius. I am the Executive Director of First Nations Awista Corporation, and we are also a CDFI. We are a certified intermediary lender, a native CDFI, and currently the only intermediary lender in the nation specifically serving Indian country and native CDFIs throughout the nation. At this juncture in time, we're present in 34 states, and a majority, if not all, of our lending constituents and partners are in extremely rural communities. So in looking at what we're going to be speaking about today within our idea number 2, we're really going to focus on providing assistance to community development financial institutions, minority depository institutions, and revolving loan funds that lend to for-profit and nonprofit businesses in underserved rural places and in Indian country. So one thing I'd like to note for those of you that are experienced and possibly for those of you that aren't. So we're going to be talking about different measures in which you can assist in lending efforts, as well as the much needed and essential operational funding to assist with continued operations, as well as technical assistance. But with CDFI specifically, and looking at rural communities, we really are the financial pillars of our organizations or financial pillars of our communities, in that a lot of rural communities are financial deserts. And without the advent of a community development financial institution that not only provides the technical assistance as well as the essential capital needed, we have changed the economic landscape of our rural communities throughout the past 20 years. One thing to note as well, collectively as a CDFI industry, we hold over $222 billion in assets. So in looking at what recovery looks like, crisis management within COVID, we are very strong institutions. And looking back in 2008, I think CDFIs really are the best known secret within the nation as being that stepladder to upwards financial mobility. But we really carried our communities through this financial crisis, and now we're finding ourselves really doing the same thing for our communities, both on a technical assistance and lending measure. So, and with that, I'm going to go back to Dennis, and we're going to look at some of our situational gaps for rural firms and what we're dealing with in regards to rural communities and COVID crisis and opportunities. Dennis?
Yeah, thank you. So if you think about what's happened, Michigan's economy has been pretty much shut down for 70 days. And for our small businesses, that means no revenue coming in, but you still have your costs. And so when we surveyed our customers recently, 40% were concerned about what the market's going to look like when things do open, and a third were concerned about will they have the cash to operate. And that's going to be true whether you're talking about for-profits or nonprofits. That this period of time has really put everybody in kind of a cash bind. So is PPP the solution? Well, some of the issues that Crystal raised and that Anthony raised are some of the barriers that small corporations in particular have been facing as they've tried to look at PPP, along with maybe the bank deserts and other issues that have played out. It started off unusually complex, and even for those small businesses who have received it, they're not sure whether they'll use it because they're concerned about can they get their employees back? How is that 8-week period working? So the shift that happened this past week was Treasury did offer that that CDFIs could have access to $10 billion. So we now have more of a possibility of reaching out to our customers and trying to get them through this program. Crystal?
Yes, and what we're looking at is a situational gap also for our CDFIs. So in looking at our presence essentially as backbone organizations, not only providing the capacity technical assistance for our consumer, small business, and homeowner lending, we also now are looking at our portfolios and really forward thinking on what that's going to mean for recovery. So complementing that with the payroll protection program, many rural serving CDFIs, minority deposit institutions, and revolving loan funds have unanimously across the board deferred payments to their end borrowers to help them make it through this financial crisis. And looking at this, a major part of our operational funds, of course, is our interest revenue. So predominantly, I can say for native CDFIs and for OESTA, our native CDFIs have done mass deferrals for their small business clients throughout the nation, and OESTA as well. We have provided a 7th-month interest and principal deferral forgiveness to really look at building up the capacity and lessening the financial strain on these organizations. So in that case, we're looking at severe operational gaps potentially in the future, being that we do not have the operational support that we normally would look at via our lending portfolios to really meet those needs. And this is happening at a time, in all honesty, one of the strongest portions of CDFI's operational measures are providing that in-depth technical assistance and capacity building to our small business owners, consumer lenders, and homeowners at this time. So when you're balancing out, we need to lend and lean in incredibly hard at this juncture. At the same time, technical assistance needs have changed dramatically, as have capacity building needs in regards to addressing this crisis adequately. So that's one thing that we're really looking at and hoping to be able to address within our conversations here.
So there are a few things that philanthropy can do, and philanthropy is doing. An example is Lundin Foundation has allowed us to be able to use some of the capital that they provided to us so that we can try a royalty product. And the idea is that with some customers, what we'll be doing is focusing on their pre-COVID revenues and allowing them to get back to post-COVID revenues that are back at 100%. But in the meantime, we'll just take a percentage of their cash as they ratchet their way up, rather than adding debt to the instrument. As I said, we've got about a third of our customers who are worried about cash, and an example is the Fremont Area Community Foundation just provided us with another $100,000 program-related investment, which will allow us to be able to make flexible loans for small businesses in their community to be able to meet some of the cash requirements that people are facing as they try to start up again. Crystal, you have some examples?
I do. I think a couple of things on that last slide to speak about the creation of loan pools and increasing the size of existing loan pools that assist within rural communities. So that's something that's actually incredibly innovative, and we've been able to show as a WISTA, specifically within our operations, that works. With the last 2 years, we put together a $10 million capital aggregate pool for native CDFIs to have the ability to take on larger amounts of capital for longer terms. The impacts that we are receiving 2 years out from this, we've already created 300 new businesses and retained over 600 new jobs. So really encompassing and looking at loan pools, I think, are incredibly important. Also, something to look at just in regards to our business models is providing grants to assist local organizations to bolster their loan loss reserves. As we're able to look at what our portfolios look like, a lot of us have already made these changes to our loan loss reserves, but it can take from our net assets. So really being able to balance our solvency and being able to be there long-term for our clients is incredibly important as institutions. And I think another idea which we've been able to have a narrative on. We've recently been working with quite a bit of foundations, and the Ceres Trust, for the first time, started lending and providing PRIs out of their endowment portfolios. So we were able to attain $275,000 by what was a really relatively new innovation for the foundation itself, but able to utilize their funds in a manner that really provides the community impact they're looking for. So I think those are several exciting ideas, and we'd really like to talk more when we have our chance in the next hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Crystal and Dennis, and that's a terrific segue to the next idea, which is to invest the catalytic capital of place-based philanthropy in the community. Leading this portion, or this profiling this idea, we'll have Deb Markley from Locus Impact Investing, Kelly Ryan, who is a fellow with the Heron Foundation and former CEO of Encourage Foundation in Wisconsin, and Bonnie Gettys from the Berry Community Foundation in Michigan.
Thank you, Janet. And as Janet said, this flows very nicely from idea number 2, because we're really focused on ways that rural communities can deploy more of what we call their sort of catalytic community capital, those locally controlled philanthropic resources, for both the recovery and the reimagining of an economy that works for everyone. And so I want to start by talking about why now and what's the gap that we're really focused on with this idea. And as both Dennis and spoke before, small business is really key in most of rural America, whether we're talking about Main Street businesses, small manufacturers on the edge of town, those nonprofit small businesses that are providing really critical services in your community. They're the lifeblood of the community, and frankly, they have really come up short and been adversely impacted as part of the COVID crisis. Dennis described this a lot. We heard it in Anthony's conversations about the PPP program. most of the financial capital that they need to survive this crisis, those federal dollars that came down, were really slow in getting to rural businesses because they had to have a relationship with a bank, and that didn't always exist. Or for a nonprofit, they had to figure out whether they were qualified and how to do the application. Often the money was gone before it made its way trickling down to rural America. The result is that those businesses, both for-profit and nonprofit businesses, are sitting in a position of having to eat away their cash just to stay alive during this initial response period. And they're not going to have the resources that they need to be part of the recovery and the rebuilding. And even those particularly nonprofit organizations who've seen an increased demand for their services have faced the real challenge of not being able to gear up because of the lack of access to capital. The good news, if there is a good news or silver lining, if you will, in this crisis, is that there are place-based assets, place-based philanthropic assets in many of these communities that are available to be deployed as part of the recovery and reimagining for communities. Place-based foundations, and we've got community foundations and health legacy foundations on this call as part of the presenters, have a broader set of tools and capitals that they can deploy at this time. They bring a long-term perspective and commitment to being of and for their communities that's going to be needed for the transformation that's going to happen. They've been dealing with the symptoms of a system that doesn't work well for everyone for a long time, only using their grant making. And I think this is the time. If not place-based foundations stepping up into this challenge, then who? And if not now, what better time to be in this place? And so I want to turn it over to Bonnie Gettys to talk about her own experience being a place-based foundation during this crisis.
Thank you, Deb. And I want to say thank you to all of you for taking time out of this incredibly traumatic time that we're in right now to be with us. In 2007, we stumbled across an interesting way of looking at community called the 7 elements of a healthy community. And during that time that we were looking at how we could strategically utilize our grant making, we really looked at how we had been investing our grant dollars, and we found that we had never invested in economy before. So we voted to look at economy. How could we do that as a community foundation? And then 2008 happened. And so, boy, were we lucky that we had voted on economy. And in 2013, we had an opportunity to partner with several of our philanthropic partners to create a revolving loan fund under the Community Foundation that would have it a separate due diligent organization to look at applications. And we actually made a bridge loan to, and not a bridge loan, a gap loan to a local developer who actually built the first hotel in our county that would assist with our tourism and other types of place-based of economy. And that loan was $1.35 million. So we used up all of our capital at that point in time. And here we are now 7 years later, and we have developed a nice set of a pool of dollars underneath that revolving loan fund from the interest. And also, so then we were ready. We were ready when COVID hit, and we looked at those 7 elements and said, where should the Community Foundation be at this point? And so we looked at 3 areas: education, because of distance learning and living in a rural place. How are we going to make sure that all of our families had access to internet? Or if they don't have, if they do have internet, do they have enough devices to be able to participate basic needs? So we had already had a loan fund or a fund for immediate needs with our local United Way. So we redeployed that. And then we looked at economy, and part of economy was because of the Small Business Administration loan fund and then the grant pieces that came down to our local community, we only got $30,000 for our small businesses out of a $1 million pool for our region. And that was very similar in other rural places. So we stepped up to the plate, and my board took $30,000 out of the revolving loan fund and dedicated it as a match. And I've run over my time already. Basically what we've done is we collected more dollars from others. We have $126,000. We have deployed over $46,000 in loans to small business. And those are micro loans. So they're just really those loans to get them through the next few months and few weeks.
Well, I hope all of you that joined and want to join the breakout afterwards will spend time with us, because Bonnie's story that continues after that is really an excellent example of catalyzing change in an organization. So I just want to say thank you for joining today. And in general, a general statement, and I will channel my new CEO at Heron, that it really is a moment in time for all philanthropy, those that are new, seasoned, place-based, regional or national, to consider that there's a moment in society and capital markets where we would do well to examine ourselves, our role in community, and what role the financial markets are playing in the outcomes that we're seeing. First and foremost, place-based philanthropy can listen to community. We can be a vehicle through which community vision and agency can be realized, and we can reflect on our own power, privilege, and role in place. Like Bonnie just described, assembling capital from donors, donor advised funds, or others to set up and manage her own, the Community Foundation's own microloan fund, can do that individually or collaboratively. As an institution, think about the broader endowment itself and committing a percentage or a portion of your endowment to investing directly in your place, or as it says on the slide, board determined criteria, which I would propose is mission alignment. You heard Dennis and Crystal talk about investing with local CDFIs or other community lenders, and we did quite a bit of this at Encourage in central Wisconsin, regional, statewide, and found them to be really wonderful partners who had the technical assistance and the ability to target specific populations of interest, and in our case, women and entrepreneurs of color. And then also step back and assess your entire portfolio for mission alignment, and not just financial capital. When Deb talked about, philanthropy has a suite of tools and capitals. It's more than financial. We have reputational capital, intellectual, social capital, and it is a moment in time where we need to examine and deploy and leverage all the capitals that we bring to bear. That includes fixed income, equity positions, understanding which publicly traded firms you own in your portfolio. It might do well to step back and look at who's really demonstrating true support for workers, communities in the midst of COVID, and are they in your portfolio? Are you investing in them? And alternatively, corporations that aren't, are they in your portfolio? We went on to talk about, I'm still finishing up on this last slide. I want to talk really briefly about national and regional philanthropy can do the same thing. It's listening to the wisdom of communities. And oftentimes community foundations like Bonnie and Barry Community Foundation, they know if they're listening to community, what their community needs. But peer learning, capacity building, the opportunity to connect and build a system is really important. And that's where regional and national philanthropy can participate. They can help us by growing the capacity and fostering collaboration across philanthropy serving organizations. And we all know a number of them in the field of philanthropy, in the field of community foundations, or in impact investing. These days, as all of you I'm sure can appreciate, there are so many webinars. There's a flood of information coming in, and the ability to curate. National and regional philanthropy can help strengthen that philanthropy serving organization mechanism. And then lastly, awareness, collaboration, and innovation. And don't lose sight of the fact that innovation happens also in times like these. So the opportunity to experiment, to take risk, that is a calling card for philanthropy. And then lastly, I would say, thinking about research, supporting things that would help boards of directors and community-based philanthropies understand what is the appetite for donor investment, their donor advised funds interest in impact investing. There's a great recent survey research at Carsey Institute. And then I would also call out Locus, because Deb wouldn't do that herself, but a new research on rural-urban interdependence and the importance of regionalism, which I think every one of us on this webinar would agree to.
Thank you, Kelly, Bonnie, and Deb. I want to go to every breakout. I don't know about the rest of you all, but we're going to move on to idea 4, which is to strengthen regional industry value chains. And we have to help us here Inez Polonius from Communities Unlimited and Molly Hemstreet from the Industrial Commons in North Carolina.
Good afternoon. I'm Inez Polonius with Communities Unlimited, and I'm joined by Molly. Both of us represent value chains that have pivoted during COVID-19. And Molly will be sharing more details during this session. I'll be sharing a few more during our breakout later. But I want to create the scenario here for why value chains are such an important economic development tool, especially in times of crisis. And looking at globalization, which has disproportionately affected rural communities. Since the 1980s, we've seen a steady loss in jobs and firms in once critical sectors in our rural economies like agriculture, furniture, wood products, textiles. Today, vertically integrated firms that are left in rural communities can't pivot. They're not making their own decisions and cannot respond to community needs in a lot of cases. And so what we see is through this lack of control, we're basically all hamstrung by this global supply chain. And I think we've seen the breakdown of that supply chain in many different ways throughout COVID-19. But COVID-19 has also revealed that no one entity can easily respond to a need or an opportunity because they can't devote their entire capacity to solving a problem. They have to worry about other market players and customers. And so I feel like we're in this moment right now where we're hyper aware of the importance of the local economy driven by local businesses, and particularly here in the South where we work, by entrepreneurs of color. And binding them into a value chain is really the power. If we could move on to the next slide, the focus really is how do we assemble and strengthen region-spanning value chains that contribute to both rural, regional, but also national resilience. And so for those who might not be familiar, a value chain is very different from a supply chain in that it's not just a network of people and businesses, it's a deep collaboration, as Molly is about to share with us, between people, businesses, organizations, federal and state agencies that address a market opportunity to meet a specific quantifiable demand for a product, for a service, while advancing self-interest that is also rooted in the local and regional wealth. And I'll add here that value chains are built around the idea that we include the people at the economic margins in the decision-making and as part of the solution in the value chain building. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Molly, who's got a great example for us. Molly?
Great, thank you, Inez, and thank you all for joining. And I might have you go ahead, Janet, and go to the next slide, because I'd like to give you a little bit of context for our value chain work and just a visual of where we're talking about here in Western North Carolina. Our value chain is located in the textile and furniture-rich manufacturing cluster of Western North Carolina. And as Inez mentioned, this region and these industries were hit very hard due to offshoring. Our metropolitan statistical area saw 40,000 jobs lost between 2000 and 2009. And despite this loss, there's been a renaissance and even a growth in pockets of textile and furniture industries over the last few years. And it's in this context that our 501c3 organization, the Industrial Commons, has its roots. And since our focus has been on supporting frontline industrial workers, building social enterprises, and linking those enterprises into these value chains in order to grow really an ecosystem that's focused on equity and agency and ownership. So one of the value chains that we'll be talking about in the next hour is the Carolina Textile District, or as we call it, the CTD. And we've been building these relationships and shared resources for small to mid-sized firms with support from our funders for the past 5 years. And so it was that our value chain and support from our funders that we were able to pivot quickly, and we've been able to retool our companies and create a strategic, nimble, collective response to sow PPE for our state stockpiles, our hospitals, our school systems, and our communities. So what we really saw, and as Inez alluded to, with this demand for PPE or personal protective equipment, that it was really too much for just one manufacturer to take on. And what it has really needed is a collective approach to meet the demand for all the producers to work together, or like we like to say, being big by being small together. And since the focus of this conversation is really about the role of the philanthropy in response to the pandemic, it's been our long-term funders that have funded our infrastructure over time, but also those same funders that allowed us some strategic funding to able to ramp up and respond quickly. So this looked like activating our supply chain and our value chain by bringing on a warehouse online, securing large amounts of raw materials, and even hiring in this day of social distancing. So there have been certainly a lot of challenges in activating and retooling our supply chain, including securing testing for federally funded FDA materials, helping plants retool, and bringing this warehouse online. But all of this was done through support from funders and with the work of the core organization of the value chain. So what have we been able to accomplish? And we'll be talking more about this in the next hour, but specifically since April, we've been able to organize 60 manufacturers to make over 200,000 units of PPE, and we have an ongoing production of 10,000 gowns and 30,000 face masks that are going into our state stockpiles. And this is also where our values come in. Instead of just trying to make disposable items that are getting put into our landfills, we're really trying to make washable items that can be used and keep our communities safe again and again and again. So not only are we protecting our communities and supporting essential workers, we're also providing valuable work for our small rural companies to stay open and economically viable. And we'll be talking about the role of philanthropy that it's supported in this work and how it's helped to make our value chain successful.
Your work is so inspiring, Molly. As this example stated so clearly, what a value chain needs in the time of crisis is very quick, responsive operating capital. And so there's a key role here for philanthropy to play both in crisis, but also taking a step back and looking at the longer term resilience and recovery that we're about to embark upon. So during crisis, it's pivoting with us, right, in the value chain and providing those resources that Molly spoke about that allowed them to purchase material, to access additional space, transportation, et cetera. It's also a time to prototype pilots or to possibly copy pilots. There's an exciting work that we're a part of, but many other organizations that do food value chain work right now that's applicable across the country as we're seeing lags in the food supply. So what does this mean longer term? It's really supporting rural development hubs that take a holistic approach to rural development, or just individual organizations that are interested in serving as coordinators the way that Molly's organization works in her value chain. Value chains just don't appear on their own. They need a coordinator who can bring folks together in times of crisis, but also just to build out the value chain longer term. There's a need for investment in local enterprises to fill business gaps along the value chain. And again, the idea behind the value chain, when you engage folks at the economic margins, they need that capital to really to really engage in the process and be successful. The other piece is there's also lots of room to invest in additional analysis of value chain opportunities, successes, and gaps that could really help a community focus on future resilience. And finally, there's a role here in training rural development agencies. The Rural Community Assistance Partnership is in collaboration right now with USDA to engage them in learning about value chains and how to utilize those in community planning and strategizing. And so in the breakout session, we're going to do a deeper dive with a video that Molly has shared with us, talking a little bit about the food value chain that we're working on, and then digging into these very short-term and medium benefits that you see here on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you
Please
so
join us.
much. Thank you so much, Inez and Molly. And now we're going to hear our last idea, a profile from John Cooper, which is to build a region's preparedness, resilience, and emergency partnerships in advance. We'll hear from John Cooper from Texas A&M, Nancy Van Milligan from the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque, and Aaron Coriel from Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies.
Thank you, Janet, for the introduction. And a lot of what you'll hear in this idea will reinforce some things that you've already heard. But I want to start with a recognition of the recent devastation due to flooding in Michigan, and with a reminder that yesterday was the start of what is predicted to be a very busy hurricane season. So we'd be remiss if we didn't encourage you to also begin thinking about how you can use whatever capacity you have to help the people and places you care about become better able to prepare for, survive, and recover from disasters. This year is the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, and by now, I hope it's commonly understood that the people who appear to be disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 are the same ones who are most vulnerable to disasters. I'm talking about the poor, people of color, and elderly folks in particular. As of this year, personally, I have 25 years of experience in disaster research and practice, and I want just to share a couple of things with you that I've learned in that time. First, in keeping with the theme of the day, I've learned that community-focused intermediaries or hub organizations are also the safety net in disasters for people who don't have the ability to survive and recover on their own without relying on the goodwill of others, that is. Another thing I've learned, and I think our collective response to COVID-19 affirms this, is that it's very hard for disaster relief and recovery efforts to be coordinated, thoughtful, efficient, inclusive, and equitable in the midst of a disaster. By definition, disasters are things you can't totally plan for, but there are some things that happen in every disaster, right? And if you plan for those, you can minimize the impact of disasters and hopefully expedite recovery. So consider this. May was National Wildfire Awareness Month. We're still in the peak of tornado season, and yesterday, as I said, was the start of the hurricane season. As a matter of fact, there's a tropical depression gaining momentum in the Gulf right now. So ask yourself, if a wildfire or a tornado or flood destroyed your community in the next few weeks and required the opening of shelters while we're still dealing with COVID-19, are you ready? Do you know who is most likely to need assistance? Do you have continuity of operations plans or mutual aid agreements with your peer organizations? Do you even know who's in charge of emergency management where you live? Right? So today, as a matter of fact, as I speak, FEMA is offering guidance to emergency managers on how to respond to a hurricane in the midst of COVID-19. Likewise, we think it should be on your radar. And for the record, we know from research and experience that the return on investment for every dollar spent on mitigating disasters is worth at least 4 times every dollar spent on relief and recovery. So that said, what do we know from research and experience with regard to rural communities? Just a couple things I want to summarize on this slide in the interest of time. Simply put, with regard to the first bullet, there's more bang for the buck in higher density areas, greater property damage, more households, more critical public facilities, more political influence. With regard to the second bullet, as discussed earlier, rural places often have fewer tax bases to draw on for recovery, and they're typically less savvy with regard to how to access external resources. With regard to the third bullet, many places are trending downward. are teetering on the brink of extinction before disaster, and they're often overlooked in the aftermath of disasters unless they have a plan. And in those cases, instead of a calamity, disasters can be an opportunity to expedite the flow of resources to places where they're needed most. And in many cases, you can invest long-term recovery dollars in addressing some of the causes of that distress that predated the disasters. So with regard to the last couple of bullets, I'll just say in the next couple of minutes, you'll hear more from Aaron and Nancy about the value of rural hubs and building resilience and promising strategies some of our friends have been implementing. And we invite you to join us in our breakout to talk more about those things.
Thanks, John. As a funder based in Minnesota, we looked at the issues of disasters, as John Molinaro was talking about, within this frame of the Red River floods. It was actually the first disaster that Margaret Cargill gave her first donation to. And that's sort of a nice, I guess, origin story, you might say, about why and how we look at the importance of preparedness. You know, we said a lot of things about mitigation dollars and how they can lead to sort of long-term impacts. I also bring it back to the Ben Franklin quote that an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. And unfortunately, what happens in disasters frequently is that the disasters always magnify the inequities and disparities that were within communities before the event occurred. And funders find themselves trying to fix structural issues with less resources than government has. And so when we think about what preparedness looks like, especially within the Midwest, I think that we're trying to think about how and what ways we can advance, especially community foundations, as one example of resilience hubs that can help people get to the table, think about their assets, think about resources that they could deploy in order to respond. So over the 10 years that we've been doing this work, community foundations have definitely become more and more sort of the lead actors within local fundraising and local efforts to think about the response to disasters. But they're also, through one of the grants that we've provided to the Funders Network for Smart Growth and Livable Communities, is over time they've also become part of the sort of preparedness strategies that local communities can use. So the PrEP program that we're going to talk about in our breakout room, and Nancy will talk about it more within her role as the CEO of the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque and previous board chair to the Funders Network, is how through working with Center for Disaster Philanthropy, TFN, and all the community foundations that have been at the table have been working together to create a peer learning network. We really feel that the foundation really feels that by people meeting and relationships building, that is a key part of sort of the long-term way that communities can be able to withstand disasters and work more effectively. So we've seen the value of supporting the PrEP program, especially even here now in COVID, and we can talk about that more in our breakout room. But it's this idea of supporting community foundations with their disaster preparedness and response capabilities that will help us kind of get to the next point of addressing some of the pre-disaster issues. I'll flip it to you, Nancy. Do you want to kind of highlight the next steps?
Sure, thanks, Erin. So the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque was fortunate to participate in the Margaret Cargill funded PrEP, which is Philanthropic Preparedness, Resiliency, and Emergency Partnerships, a big mouthful. The immediate benefit of that to us was it totally built our own capacity to respond to disasters internally and as an organization, but it also gave us the ability to pivot and quickly ramp up and respond to disasters Through the program, we know our partners, we know how to pull together the resources we need to respond. We have a communication plan, an understanding of the community's assets and what's needed, and we can move quickly. I encourage funders, as you hear this, to think about funding during a disaster. Things come up, people need support with technical assistance, doing some research, translators for our vulnerable populations, our immigrant populations, case management. So often in rural communities, there isn't the case management needed to really be a good funder. But the long-term and the midterm benefits, you really become a prepared and a resilient organizations. I feel strongly that for rural to function, we need to be networked, we need to be collaborative, we need to, in disasters, because of PrEP, we know our emergency managers, we know we've met with the government officials, we know who the players are, so when a disaster hits, we're ready to rock and roll. For instance, with COVID-19, having relationships with these folks and the different food distribution providers really allowed us to feed thousands of families efficiently and effectively, with the focus really on the needs of the people and especially the most vulnerable, but with very few issues of agency turf, which is so important because we were a team, we were a partnership, we're a network and collaborative, really trying to build our community. So that regional response is so important, and to do that, that PrEP program really helped us to put the pieces together to go forward. So I know we're out of time, and come to our session. It's a great story of community foundations, peer learning, and other organizations. There's our bell.
Thank you so much, Nancy, Aaron, and John. Now it's time, we're running a couple minutes over, but it won't hurt anything. Now it's time to go into one of these breakouts. I mean, you don't have to. You've gotten some 5 good ideas. The PowerPoint will be available on the website. We'll send you this recording if you want to watch it again later. But right now, we want you to, if you want to explore any of this, and all of the people who spoke, all of the fabulous people who just spoke will be in the breakouts, taking your questions. You can offer each other advice, et cetera, explore as you wish. You have received before, several times today, I think you've received an email that tells you the breakout links for each idea. And so all you have to do is go to that email and hit the breakout link. If you did not receive it, please send a note to csg.program@aspeninstitute.org and someone will send it to you. Recordings of the session and the breakout rooms will be available within 24 hours, and the PowerPoint is available on aspencsg.org. Once again, here are the ideas. Although it says here 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know which idea you care about. I want to once again thank today's partners: Rural Development Innovation Group, Aspen Institute Community Strategy Group, United Philanthropy Forum, Rural LISC, Housing Assistance Council, and the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. We'll end now and see you in just a few minutes in your breakout room. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.